No. And then just making sure we're on Zoom, on Facebook as well, and then I'm going to let everyone in the room now. Is that okay? Are you all happy? Hi everyone, I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes and then we'll get started just as everyone's sort of filtering in. For anyone that's just joined, I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes as more people are coming in, and then we'll get going. Okay, that looks like pretty much slow down a little bit there now. So welcome to the first Female Athlete Monthly Meeting hosted by the Women in Sport and Exercise Academic Network and the Period of the Period. So as I said, this is our very first meeting, so it's great to see so many of you signed up on the call as well as live on our Facebook group. So it's great to have so many of you here. So these webinars will basically be running monthly, and each month we'll have a new guest presenter or presenters sharing some of their research and experience working in this area. We'll try and cover a broad range of topics, all related to female-specific considerations in sport, so from the menstrual cycle, hormonal contraceptive use, breast health, pelvic floor health, pregnancy, menopause, etc. throughout the months. So how it will work is I'm going to briefly introduce Nuria and Anna in a moment, and then I'll then hand over to them to present for roughly 30-40 minutes, and then we'll sort of finish with a brief Q&A. I'll just ask everyone to just remain on mute whilst Nuria and Anna are presenting, and then if you could just pop any questions that you have into the sort of chat at the end, and then I'll monitor them as we go through. Basically, I think that might be the best way to do this. So before I actually get started, I just want to briefly mention that the Women in Sport and Exercise Academic Network have their annual conference coming up in April. So if anyone's interested in attending that virtually, then do check out their website for more information. It's always a great few days of female athlete focused research. So as I mentioned before, we're super lucky to be joined by Nuria and Anna all the way from Spain this evening. So Anna is a professor at the University of Madrid and is the principal investigator of the research project Famm. And the IronFem project aims to sort of deepen knowledge about women's responses to exercise in order to better design training programs specific to sportswomen. So totally amazing. And Anna's particular line of research focused on the effects of female reproductive hormones on iron metabolism after exercise. And then Nuria has just recently completed her PhD as part of the IronFem group. And her thesis is titled The Influence of the Menstrual Cycle or Contraceptives and Menopause on Exercise-Induced Muscle Damage. And she'll be presenting some of this research to you all this evening. So yeah, I'm going to hand you all over to Anna and Nuria now.
Thank you very much, Kelly. You introduced us perfectly, so I think that Anna can get us started.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, I mistake the screen. Okay, no, oh. Okay, there we go. It's okay?
Now it's in the...
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect?
Now we can see the
we can see your notes.
No, the presenter view.
Okay. Now?
Now it's okay.
Perfect. Okay. Well, hello everyone. Thank you, Kelly, for inviting us to this wonderful Female Athlete Monthly Meet. It's a huge pleasure to share our work with all of you. So again, thank you so much. My name is Peinado. I am the head of the Laboratory of Exercise Physiology Research Group and the main investigator of the IronFem project. In the next few minutes, I'm going to present briefly this study because today the protagonist speaker is Nuria Romero. The IronFem project is the acronym of the study entitled Iron and Muscular Damage, Female Metabolism and Menstrual Cycle During Exercise. The IronFem study is funded by the Spanish government, and this funding was received to develop the IronFem project from 2017 to 2019, and it was extended to 2020. The IronFem project was designed to increase the knowledge regarding the influence of sex hormones on some aspects of the exercise-related female physiology. Iron metabolism and exercise-induced muscle damage have been studied considering the different reproductive status present throughout well-trained females' lifespan. The project consisted of two sections or studies carried out at the same time. The study 1, known as iron metabolism study, and the study 2, or muscle damage study. The main objective of the study 1 was to determine the influence of different hormonal profiles on iron metabolism in response to endurance exercise, while the aim of the study 2 was to observe the influence of sex hormones on muscle damage and inflammation in response to resistant exercise. Both sections were performed in amenorrheic women, oral contraceptive user women, and well-trained postmenopausal women. The methodology of this project has already been published, as you can see in the slide. This is the paper. And here we can see the flow diagram. 104 physical active and healthy women were selected to participate in the study, 57 of whom were amenorrheic, 31 were oral contraceptive users, and 16 were postmenopausal women. Regarding study 1, 21 amenorrheic, 16 oral contraceptive users, and 13 postmenopausal women completed the study. And regarding study 2, 19 amenorrheic, 18 oral contraceptive users, and 13 postmenopausal women completed this study. Amenorrheic women were selected to participate in the, Amenorrheic women selected to participate in study 1 and 2 were different, whereas oral contraceptive users and postmenopausal women were recruited to participate in both studies. This is the timeline of testing across a regular menstrual cycle of 28 days. The testing days for the early follicular phase were between the days 2 to 5 of the cycle, between the days 11 to 13 for the late follicular phase, considering day 14 as ovulation, and for the menstrual phase, between days 19 to 33 of the cycle. These specific phases were selected in order to analyze different hormonal environments as suggested by the literature. Low sex hormonal levels in the early follicular phase, low progesterone but high estrogen levels in the late follicular phase, and elevated both progesterone and estrogen levels in the menstrual phase. The three-step method was used to verify the menstrual cycle phase. The first one is the calendar-based counting. We also use the urinary luteinizing hormone measurement. And finally, we confirm the menstrual cycle phases with a serum hormone analysis. Oral contraceptive users, women, had to consume monophasic oral contraceptives and perform the exercise test at 2 moments, withdrawal and active pill phase. Specifically, participants from this study group were evaluated between days 4 to 7 in the withdrawal phase and between the 2nd or 3rd week of the active pill phase. And lastly, postmenopausal women were only tested once since their hormonal status doesn't fluctuate. The exercise protocol of the study 1 consisted of an interval running protocol. After 5 minutes of warm-up, 8 bouts of 3 minutes at 85% of the maximal aerobic velocity with 19 seconds recovering at 30% of maximal aerobic velocity between bouts were performed. And finally, a 5 minutes cool down was also performed. And here you can see the protocol of the testing day of study 2. The participants perform an eccentric-based resistant exercise protocol consisting of 10 sets of 10 repetitions of parallel back squat at 60% of their 1 repetition maximum with 2 minutes of recovery between sets. Well, this is my brief presentation. Now it's time for Nuria, who is going to talk about the main results of this study about muscle damage. She presented her PhD thesis last January, and her work is really brilliant. So finally, I would like to thank my research group for their support, and thank you everyone. And if you have any question, please contact me. Thank you. Nuria, your time.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay, can you see the presentation properly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna, for the introduction. And again, thank you, Kelly, for having us today, because we are really happy and honored to be the first guests for the Female Athlete Meet. And we hope that this hour will worth the time of everyone there. So now, having in mind these 3 reproductive profiles that Anna mentioned, the premenopausal females with natural menstrual cycles, premenopausal females users of oral contraceptives, and postmenopausal females, I will dive in the part of the study focused on the exercise-induced muscle damage. Sorry, a second. Okay. Exercise-induced muscle damage, which is a process that takes place mainly after eccentric and unaccustomed exercise, and is characterized by some indirect markers as strength loss, muscle soreness, the release of muscle proteins into the bloodstream, the decrease in the range of movement, or the increase in limb circumferences. The direct method to measure muscle damage will be the muscle biopsy. And after muscle damage takes place, the natural inflammatory process occurs involving immune cells, cytokines, and other substances that are necessary to repair the muscle tissue. So after some literature reading regarding the influence of these different hormonal profiles on exercise-induced muscle damage, or hypothesis where exercise-induced muscle damage and inflammation are increased in the menstrual cycle phases where sex hormone levels are lower and affected by oral contraceptive cycle phases, and more pronounced in postmenopausal females than in premenopausal eumenoreic females. These are some of the abbreviations that I'll be using during the presentation, and let's cut to the chase and talk about this systematic review and meta-analysis published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research that we performed following PRISMA guidelines. The search strategy combined terms related to muscle damage, menstrual cycle, and exercise, and we included studies in English reporting information on exercise-induced muscle damage in at least one specific menstrual cycle phase. The reasons for exclusion were studies with only men participants, or with men and women showing results from both groups together, studies with animals, with people with pathologies, premenarcheal, postmenopausal females or users of hormonal contraception, female participants but not considering and reporting the menstrual cycle, studies analyzing muscle fatigue without muscle damage markers, or not journal articles like, for example, conference papers or whatever. This is the flow chart showing the step-by-step process, and 26 studies were included in the qualitative synthesis that turned out to be rated as 9.6 out of 10, and which means that studies were adequate or representative in terms of study design. And out of these 26, 7 studies were excluded and 19 were included in the meta-analysis. From these 19 studies, 12 evaluated one menstrual cycle phase and only 6 compared 2 menstrual cycle phases, while one of them compared 3 menstrual cycle phases, but with different participants for each phase. In addition, despite all of them using the calendar counting method, only 10 analyzed blood sex hormones and only 3 used urine tests to detect LH surge preceding ovulation. So none of them included the 3 of them as previous research has recommended. These are the results from Eager's test and funnel plots showing significant publication bias, which could be observed from the p-values and from the points deviating from a funnel shape. And this may indicate that although the study quality was okay, we would need a more specific tool to evaluate the quality of studies with female participants. In addition, heterogeneity was also high, and then the need to look for possible causes. That's the reason why we performed a supplementary analysis evaluating the severity of muscle damage produced by the exercise protocol. And this analysis revealed that the exercise protocol was not a source of heterogeneity. So we observed differences between phases for muscle soreness between 24 and 72 hours post-exercise, and for strength loss from immediately post-exercise to 72 hours post-exercise. These differences were higher in the early follicular phase and lower in the mid-luteal phase, or in other words, the effect of the exercise on muscle damage response was higher or was larger in the early follicular phase and smaller in the mid-luteal phase. And the same happened with strength loss. Larger effect for the early follicular phase, a smaller effect for the mid-luteal phase. In contrast, no differences between phases were observed for CK. So the systematic review and meta-analysis suggests that sex hormone fluctuations over the menstrual cycle influence muscle damage response, specifically post-exercise differences in muscle soreness and strength loss in comparison to baseline are reduced in the mid-luteal phase and increase in the early follicular phase, while CK was not affected by menstrual cycle phases. However, as I mentioned before, the monitoring and verification of menstrual cycle phases in the studies analyzed were not exactly the most appropriate or the most adequate. So this effect should be confirmed in future studies. And that is what we tried to do in Iron Famm project. So specifically for the muscle damage part, with the sample size estimation of 14 participants to reach statistical power, as Anna mentioned, 19 human-erect females, 18 oral contraceptive users, and 13 postmenopausal females completed the study. Our inclusion criteria were age and resistance training experience, a minimum of 1 hour 2 times per week during a year. But this was the resistance training experience for the premenopausal groups, and this was for the postmenopausal group. Then human-erect females were excluded if they didn't have regular menstrual cycles or if they reported the use of hormonal contraception in the 6 months preceding the study. For oral contraceptive users, the reasons for exclusion were the use of hormonal contraception different from monophasic oral contraceptives or the use of this method for less than 6 months. And further reasons for exclusion were metabolic problems, surgeries or injuries that may be exacerbated by an eccentric exercise, pregnancy, smoking, and the use of supplements or medication. The initial measurements took place, as Anna said, between the 2nd and the 5th day of the menstrual cycle for the human-erect participants, between days 3 and 7 of the withdrawal phase for the oral contraceptive group, and the first available day for the postmenopausal group. And in this screening session, we took blood samples, we measured height and weight, we analyzed body composition via DEXA scan, and the 1RM evaluation in the parallel back squat exercise with the power lift app, which nowadays is called My Lift. And in this test, they had to perform 4 sets of 1 rep with loads between 75 and 90% of their self-estimated maximum, and the app provided the load for the 1RM. So the determination of menstrual cycle phases was initially carried out by gynecologists that confirmed that menstrual cycles were regular and estimated the days for the different menstrual cycle phases and ovulation, according to the information provided by participants on the length of their 6 last menstrual cycles. And as Anna mentioned, we used the 3-step method previously recommended to verify menstrual cycle phases, consisting on the calendar counting method, the analysis of blood sex hormones in each phase, and the use of urine tests to detect LH surge preceding ovulation. So participants used these tests from 3 to 5 days before the late follicular phase trial, and the positive results should be obtained on testing day or in the 2 subsequent days in order to ensure that the late follicular phase trial was performed under high estrogen concentrations. The eccentric exercise protocol was performed in the 3 menstrual cycle phases and the 2 oral contraceptive phases previously mentioned, and on 1 occasion for the postmenopausal group. And in this session, we took blood samples to analyze hormones, and we measured thigh and calf circumferences. Then we asked participants for their perceived muscle soreness during the body weight squat, and after that, they performed a 5-minute bike warm-up, followed by the assessment of the hip and knee range of movement and the evaluation of a counter movement jump with the My Jump app. And after some mobility and dynamic stretching exercises, the 1RM was estimated again, and the exercise protocol was performed at 60% of their 1RM. And after every set, we asked them for their perceived exertion. And immediately after the exercise protocol, they performed another counter movement jump. And 2 hours post-exercise, we took blood samples. Then 24 and 48 hours post-exercise, the measurements were all repeated. So if anybody is interested in specifically in the statistical analysis, we can have a look at the end of the presentation. And let's talk about these 2 studies, both referring to human females. And these are the results for sex hormone concentrations, and they were the expected according to the different menstrual cycle phases. So the LH was higher in the late follicular phase. FSH was lower in the mid-luteal phase. Estrogen was higher in the late follicular and mid-luteal phases in comparison to the early follicular phase. And progesterone was higher in the mid-luteal phase. The only variable that appeared to be influenced by menstrual cycle phases was perceived muscle soreness, and interestingly, before the exercise bout. So this may be related to the menstrual disturbances or side effects. But interestingly, this effect was not observed in post-exercise measurements. It's important to notice that the variability between subjects was high, and this might have affected the differences. And no differences between phases were observed for perceived exertion, for the 1RM, for the counter movement jump, for the range of movement or the circumferences, and either for the blood markers of muscle damage and inflammation, except an interaction that was observed between time and menstrual cycle phase for IL-6, that supported by a moderate effect size may indicate that 2 hours post-exercise values were higher than pre-trial and 24 and 48 hours post-exercise. And this was also observed in a previous study, a pilot study that we performed in our lab. But as we did not see an increment in TNF, together with the IL-6, we cannot confirm this finding. There were also differences in time, in perceived muscle soreness, and in the knee range of motion, and also in CK, all of them coinciding in peak values 24 hours post-exercise, while myoglobin and LDH, also counter movement jump values were still reduced at 24 hours post-exercise. And for myoglobin and LDH, the peak values were 2 hours post-exercise. So the conclusion for these studies are that in resistance-trained females after an eccentric squat exercise, the sole and direct marker that seems to be affected by the menstrual cycle is muscle soreness, which was higher in the early follicular phase before starting the exercise bout. Sex hormone fluctuations do not affect blood markers of muscle damage and inflammation, and the mid-luteal phase might be the only one showing an increase in IL-6, although, as I mentioned, this should be taken cautiously. This study about oral contraceptive users was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, and these are the oral contraceptive preparations that we used or that our participants reported. And these are the results for sex hormones, endogenous sex hormones, and the differences were the expected ones, again, between phases, so higher FSH and estradiol in the withdrawal phase. The most relevant finding of this study is that CK values were higher in the withdrawal phase, and this may suggest that the 21 days of exogenous hormone supply may have a protective effect and over this more vulnerable phase that should be the withdrawal phase, and in fact is more, or it is said to be more adequately considered as a transient period than a phase. However, the lack of differences in any other muscle damage markers, inflammation markers, or in the 1RM suggests taking this finding cautiously. In addition, again, the variability between subjects was also high. There were differences in time points in all the muscle damage markers. Some of them showed 24-hour peak values and some of them 2-hour peak values, as happened in the immunoraic studies. And the conclusion for this one is that exogenous hormone supply from oral contraceptives seems to attenuate CK increase in the active pill phase in comparison to the withdrawal phase, but the lack of differences in any other markers suggests that no guidance could be stated on the active pill versus the withdrawal phase for eccentric exercise and muscle damaging resistance trained females. Finally, this study about postmenopausal females has been recently accepted for publication, and in this case, I will show you first the results for the postmenopausal group, the differences in time. So there were differences for CK and muscle soreness with peak values around 24 hours post-exercise, and also in myoglobin around 2 hours post-exercise. When we compared postmenopausal females with human-erect females in the different menstrual cycle phases, we observed some differences, obviously in age, and then in body mass and BMI. And interestingly, we did not see differences in fat-free mass, but we did observe differences in strength in the 1RM. Regarding sex hormone concentrations, human-erect females showed higher levels of all of them, except for estradiol in the early follicular phase and progesterone in the early and late follicular phases. Some authors suggest that this hormone deprivation may increase muscle deterioration, and maybe this is the reason why we observe differences in strength. In fact, we decided to use the 1RM and the age as covariates in our analysis. In line with this, myoglobin at baseline was also higher in the postmenopausal group than in the different menstrual cycle phases. And for CK, there were not statistical differences, but the moderate effect size did suggest these differences at baseline. So despite all these differences at baseline, we did not observe post-exercise differences in muscle damage and inflammation between groups. And we thought that this may be due to the training status of participants, but of course we will need a sedentary group to confirm this statement. So the conclusion for this study is that sex hormone deprivation derived from menopause may influence some basal muscle damage markers and strength, but post-exercise muscle damage and inflammation were not different between both groups, and thus these responses seem not to be affected by hormonal environment. I would like to mention some limitations. The exercise protocol was not intense enough to trigger a greater muscle damage response and a noteworthy inflammatory response, and this may be due to the fact that the protocol was lower limb exercise and we use our legs for the daily activities, but we wanted an exercise that was real. I mean, that people or active females or athletes do in their daily trainings, and back squat is one of them. Then the variability between subjects was high, and I already mentioned it. Then we did not evaluate muscle damage through muscle biopsy, which I mentioned is the gold standard to measure muscle damage. Then it would have been interesting to measure sex hormones through different testing, day by day during the 72 hours of testing. And finally, the oral contraceptive preparations did not provide the same dose of progesterone. Some take-home messages, especially for coaches, are there is important track on talk, which track the menstrual cycle with apps. That the apps are based on the calendar counting method or paper if you prefer, but it's okay. We need to track the menstrual cycle, but also we need to talk with the athletes. And I listen to the podcast on the period of the period, and in the second episode, Dr. Kirsty Elliott said that we need to talk with our athletes, and I totally agree with that, because we need to learn as coaches, and also athletes have to learn about their menstrual cycle, their oral contraceptive cycle, how they feel about it. And I think this is really important. I have been tracking my menstrual cycle during my entire life, and I fully understand now my menstrual cycle, but I think this is really, really important. And also for consecutive months, not only 1 month or 2, but at least 6 months, to know a little bit more about the menstrual cycle or the oral contraceptive cycle every participant. And of course, the use of urine tests is really attainable, and it provides useful information. Then on the basis of our results, if higher perceived muscle soreness is observed during the early follicular phase, it could be interesting to prescribe softer training loads or more motivating tasks in this phase, and also to pay attention to the withdrawal phase, even though I mentioned that there were no differences, but this leads me to a very important key thing, that is individualization is still needed. So some women will experience side effects and menstrual disturbances associated to the early follicular phase, to the late luteal phase, to the withdrawal phase, and some other women won't. So we need to adjust training and adaptations for everyone. And finally, as coaches, to encourage postmenopausal females to get resistance trained, since it seems positive to attenuate exercise-induced muscle damage, or at least to compensate the effect of aging in muscle quality. To finish the presentation, I would like to say some ideas about future studies, as the analysis of different forms of hormonal contraception really common nowadays. The inclusion of sedentary females as well as users of hormone replacement therapy in the postmenopausal study, in order to see the effect of this training status. And the analysis of muscle damage after a more complete resistance training session with different exercise. This should be really real. And that's all. As Anna mentioned, well, this is our research group. I think it's really important to have a team, and these are the volunteers, the students, and also Dr. Janse de Jong, who helped us a lot. She is awesome. And that's all. Thank you very much for coming or for being there. I am available for all the questions that you have. I hope I can answer, sorry. And I leave there my email address just in case someone wants to give me an email or something. So I'm gonna stop sharing.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Nuria. That was great. I've just noticed we haven't got any questions at the moment, but if anyone does have a question, pop it in the chat and we will get it answered. Yeah, so firstly, I guess from that, wow, what an amazing undertaking all of that was. What was your experience, Nuria, of being a researcher in this area? And would you have any sort of like top tips for anyone that is researching in this area right now? Because it is such a massive undertaking, especially that study that you just presented there.
Well, first of all, as I mentioned, it's really important to have a good group of people with you because it's the base and it's easier to get funding for a project and to develop a project. And then when we analyze women, I would say to have patience because the monitoring of menstrual cycle is not easy, and there will be some ups and downs during the data collection, for example. And well, I think that well, this is the key thing, but well, I think my experience was really good because we were all really well organized, and I think this is the key.
Yeah, no, definitely, that's perfect. So really, we've got some questions coming in now. So sorry if I missed it, but how do you minimize the confounding factor of lower levels of DOMS due to the repeated bout effect when performing these eccentric protocols?
Okay, as our sessions were randomized and counterbalanced, we suppose that we are avoiding this effect, this learning, well, is learning effect, and here is the repeated bout effect, but at least with this counterbalance order, we are trying to avoid this, even though we want to analyze the comparison between sessions, not exactly between phases. We still have to do this in order to confirm that there wasn't the repeated bout effect for this group, but at least we counterbalance the sessions. So we did it this way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And were there any individual responses that surprised you?
Well, this is another thing that we want to do to analyze the individual response, because it's true that we observe data for everybody independently, and when we observe very high levels like outliers, we have to remove them from the analysis. There were not a lot, maybe one or two, and there were people with a very high response. And this is very important too. We have to think about it because there are people who respond and people who don't. So, but nothing like surprising, I think. Well, it was surprising that when we were doing the exercise protocol, when we asked them for their perceived exertion after every set, they rated increasingly, they rated as 9, 8, almost reaching the maximum. But then at 24 hours or 48 hours post exercise, when we asked them for their muscle soreness, was not that high. It was like 3 or 4 out of 10. So it was not that high to rate at 10 after the exercise protocol. So it was curious.
Yeah, definitely. And there's another question here that says, thank you, great presentation, which it was. Did you find greater inflammation markers in oral contraceptive users?
Okay, I was reading, sorry, because I was trying to read at the same time, and I don't see the question. Could you repeat the question, Kelly, please?
Yeah, it says, did you find greater inflammation markers in oral contraceptive users?
We did not observe great inflammation markers in oral contraceptive users, either in eumenorrheic females, either in postmenopausal females. So the inflammation response was not as noteworthy as we wanted or as we expected. But either the muscle damage response was that high. That's the reason why I added this as a limitation. Was not exactly as a limitation, it was a result, but the muscle damage response was not really high. So it was significant because in comparison to baseline, it was significant, but not that high to overcome the reference values. So maybe the training status of participants was really good, and the 10/10 protocol was not that intense. So the inflammation was not as expected, unfortunately.
Yeah, so we've got another question about the actual protocol. So it says, when looking at muscle soreness with 10x10 back squats in the different phases, did the weight change, or were they able to maintain it across all the phases?
Yes, we have kind of protocol of decreasing load, because that's the reason why I was saying that it was weird that they have to reduce, and then the muscle soreness was not very significant. So we started the protocol, and if they cannot finish a set properly, we have a little reduction in weight and a second reduction in weight. And the last thing was modifying a little bit the range of movement for the squat that was not necessary in almost anybody. But yes, it was like a 5% reduction and a second 5% reduction in weight.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's also a question around if you were to expand on this, did you look at the sort of nutritional aspects and how they might have influenced anything?
Yeah, sorry. I'm going to share again my screen a little bit, because I have a slide talking about it. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can, yeah.
We ask participants to complete a 72-hour diet record during not only so during testing. They have to record the previous day, testing day, and the following day for the 3 phases or 2 phases, depending on the participant. And also during the entire project, they have to record 3 weekdays and 1 day of the weekend to about the food that they intake. So and our nutritionist provide them with a menu with a couple of options, as you can observe on the slide, and all of them had to follow these instructions. And this information, this data are being processed and analyzed nowadays. So we don't have yet the results for all of these, but yeah, we have studied this also.
Yeah.
Yes, Anna answered.
Another question.
Thank you. So we are a team.
Another question there about, or did you, when you compare the eumenorrheic women and the oral contraceptives users, did you find similar baseline inflammatory markers?
Okay, this is an interesting question, and we did not compare the eumenorrheic and the oral contraceptive users. So we didn't do it yet. It is also another idea. So we have still some ideas, but our purpose was to compare eumenorrheic females between them to observe the effect of the different menstrual cycle phases, then aside the oral contraceptive users between their phases. And then it's true that we compare postmenopausal with eumenorrheic. This is true, but also because we wanted to know about the difference between the natural sex hormone or sex hormonal environment and the deprived one because of the menopause. But it's true that we have this idea to compare human rate with oral contraceptive, and we didn't have now this information, but it is in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that sounds brilliant. And then there's another question here saying that if you were to repeat the study again next time to keep the squat protocol, would you keep that to evoke the exercise-induced muscle damage, or would you use a different approach, such as an isokinetic diameter, or to standardize the eccentric loading for all the participants? Sorry, I got tongue-tied on that question then.
Well, this is a really good question, but so when we chose the back squat exercise, it was because we wanted something more real, as I mentioned. So there are protocols that we know, also, so we knew that there will be more damaging, like isokinetic or upper limb or whatever. But I think that if we can change, or not change, but extend or study and test a different thing, I think that we will use an entire resistance training session, not an isolated protocol, because it's true that to elicit muscle damage, it will be better an isolated protocol more damaging, but we preferred a bit more external validity. I mean, yes, external validity, I can say that, and a resistance training session, for example, a CrossFit session, or an entire training session of I don't know, a female athlete that is in a football team or something. So something more real better than a more damaging but so isolated protocol.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I don't think we have any more questions coming in there. I think we've covered them all. I'm pretty sure I haven't missed anyone out, but there's a lot of thank yous, and yeah, definitely thank you. It was amazing. I'm just checking that, making sure there's nothing else coming in. No, I think that is it. So yeah, thank you, Nuria and Anna, for that presentation and for allowing us to ask lots of questions. And also a big thank you to everyone who logged on. I know the Facebook Live didn't work, but we have recorded this, and I will put that out for anyone who's missed it in the next few days, or if anyone just wants to rewatch it again. So the next meeting is on Monday, the 26th of April, again at 6:30. And this time we're going to be joined by Natalie Brown. So she is a research assistant at the Welsh Institute of Performance Science, and going to be talking about the menstrual cycle on sports participation and performance. So look out for that information coming soon. And apart from that, that's everything from me. And thank you again, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you.
Great opportunity.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.